I want you to take a moment to look at these pictures. The one thing these patients have in common is that they can no longer speak or communicate to other people. And the only thing keeping them alive are these machines. Imagine your parents in this situation. Seeing them in this condition, can you decide what happens next to them? Our society has a problem with managing end-of-life care because we're so uncomfortable with talking about death. It seems like a weird topic to think about, but that's only because you're so used to avoiding these kinds of conversations. But there will come a time when your parents will be on their deathbed and you will have to decide their fate. You will have to make their medical decisions because you guys never had planned anything. So today I will be talking to you about the issue with not having a plan for end-of-life care, the 3 groups it affects, and also the solution to it all. So I personally have shadowed a doctor in the intensive care unit and witnessed families arguing over what to do next with their mother, their dying mother. And these family members turn on each other. They start arguing. They decide whether to take her off the machines or continue treatment. So we'll start with the problem here. The problem is end-of-life care is burdensome and complicated because people don't plan ahead of time. The first way it's complicated is that the patient becomes incompetent and is unable to speak. According to the U.S. National Library of Medicine, 76% of patients are unable to participate in their own life care decisions. The patients that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation are perfect examples of people who cannot participate. Other examples are like somebody with severe Alzheimer's. They don't have the mental capacity to generate these ideas and clearly communicate them to people. So these patients cannot express their wants. The second way that end-of-life care is complicated is that all the responsibility that was the patient's is now the family's, or a surrogate. A healthcare surrogate is someone who has chosen an adult that makes the healthcare decisions for patients who can no longer make those decisions. So imagine, I'm assuming your parents have not talked to you about end-of-life care. If they unexpectedly got into a car crash in an ICU, lying there incompetent, you would have to make their decisions. With no preparation, no communication, you would have all that responsibility, not knowing what they wanted and not knowing what to do. So this affects 3 people. The burden is placed on 3 groups of people: the patient, the family of the patient, and the medical team. The patient is the affected, according to Judith Johnson of the Huffington Post. Many of us have a hard time discussing the reality of death with our loved ones, and thereby we are denied the opportunity to share our feelings. This creates an environment where the terminally ill patients have to fake a smile and are emotionally isolated. They already feel like such a burden. They feel like they are a waste of resources and money just because they have the inevitable outcome of death. So, just because society is so uncomfortable with death, these people have to fake that they're not suffering. So the second group affected is the family. So according to the Family Medicine Journal, patients who do not decide treatment place a moral burden on the surrogates, people who are struggling with the role that they may not have wanted or were unprepared to assume. I've seen families leave the hospital because they said they are afraid to make a decision. This was in my short time in the ICU, so I can't imagine how often this actually happens. Even if they had stayed, the situation could have been hectic. According to the Journal of Death Studies, family members bring differing moral burdens and standards to difficult decisions when they want to treat a loved one. In the ICU, I saw families fighting, physically fighting, yelling at each other, and the brother had said, "I'm embarrassed to be related to people who want to kill their mom." The sisters wanted to take the mom off the feeding tube, but the brothers didn't. So, this lack of communication created a division in the family. The third group affected is the medical team. According to Dr. Giles Fraser of The Guardian, medicine thus carries the burden of the obligation to do everything they can to the patient. If they don't get an opinion from the patient, they have an obligation to do whatever they can to keep them alive. So because of that, they have to go against the patient's values. According to the Journal of Bioethical Inquiry, healthcare professionals find it hard to discuss to patients end-of-life issues because they think the discussion is not fair to the patient. So imagine a physician who treats terminally ill patients is uncomfortable talking about death. How can you organize a treatment plan if they're uncomfortable with that? So healthcare quality actually suffers just because of lack of communication. According to the American Journal of Public Health, inappropriate care is a logical consequence if the caregiver doesn't know in advance what the patient wants. So now that you know the problem and the 3 people affected, let's go to the solution. The solution, this problem is very real. It will affect you, whether you think so or not, and the burdens are very heavy, but there's a way to relieve these burdens. I split the solution into 2 alternatives, a formal alternative and an informal alternative. The advance directive is a legal document typically filed through a living will. According to the BMJ Journal, advanced care planning is meant for patients in consultation with healthcare professionals, their family, and important people to decide future treatment for when they're incapable of deciding. So basically, they have their instructions for when they cannot tell the doctor instructions. This provides the patient with the ability to be involved with the decision-making process when they cannot be involved. And it also provides the doctor with instructions to know what the patient wanted. It'll help relieve the worries of going against the patient's values. Although the advance directive seems very beneficial, it is very complicated. It takes a while to file, and a lawyer is required. So it also lacks qualitative details such as hopes and fears of the patient, which could be determined through personal conversation. This leads me to my informal alternative. Simply having a discussion. This allows you to find out what the patient wants and what the patient fears. It'll give the patient a support system and not force them to be isolated. They'll feel comfortable talking about the negatives and positives of their diagnosis. Also, these conversations function to prepare patients and potential surrogates for the critical, in-the-moment medical decisions. So with preparation and communication, the burdens are relieved, and you don't have to worry about taking a long process and paying for a lawyer. According to the Medical Protection Society, when doctors, patients, and families all have communication, no matter the physical outcome, grief is typically handled better. So now that I'm finished with the discussion here, you can now have the discussion out there. The intensive care unit is a very scary place, especially with loved ones. I can't imagine making the decision of unhooking a parent from a machine and watching them just wither away. Today I talked to you about the problem with not having a plan for end-of-life care, how it affects patients, the surrogate, and the medical team, and 2 simple solutions to resolve all that. So death is a guarantee, like taxes. So why do we even avoid it? We should confront these things and make it easier so when that critical decision-making moment arrives, you're ready for it. It's a simple solution, and it's very realistic for all of us to accomplish. It'll be easy. All it is just conversation, being comfortable. So we no longer should ignore these conversations. We need to acknowledge that death is as important as life, and change the culture of death and shift it towards something more comfortable for everybody. Thank you.